The cathedral stood like a frozen fortress against the December night, its Gothic spires piercing the falling snow. Inside, 200 guests filled the pews, their breath forming small clouds in the candlelit air despite the roaring fireplaces. The ceremony had been planned for months, every detail approved by military protocol, every guest vetted by security. This was, after all, the wedding of Alara Thompson, only daughter of General Marcus Thompson, commander of the Northern Defense Coalition. White roses cascaded down the stone pillars. The bride wore her mother's dress, silk and lace that caught the candlelight like fresh snow. Her groom, Captain Daniel Porter, stood at the altar in his dress uniform, medals gleaming. Everything appeared perfect, a scene from a winter fairy tale. But 800 meters away, on the bell tower of the abandoned church across the frozen park, someone watched through a different lens. Aurora Hale steadied her breathing, her eye pressed against the scope of a custom rifle that had no official designation in any military inventory. The crosshairs moved slowly across the cathedral windows, cataloging every shadow, every movement. She had been in position for 6 hours, since before dawn, watching the setup, the arrivals, the careful choreography of a military wedding. The snow had been her ally, muffling sound, obscuring sightlines. Her white winter ghillie suit made her invisible against the stone and ice. Even her breath dispersed through a specialized mask that prevented the telltale fog that could betray a sniper's position. She shouldn't have been there. Officially, Aurora White Raven Hale had died 5 years ago in a training accident in the Arctic. The funeral had been closed casket, the file had been sealed, the legend had been buried. But Marcus Thompson knew the truth. He had been the one to help her disappear after the mission that broke her, after she lost her entire team, after the man she loved bled out in her arms while she held pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The general's message had reached her 3 days ago, delivered by a courier who knew only to leave a package at a specific GPS coordinate in the Alaskan wilderness. Inside, a single wedding invitation and a handwritten note. Protect her like you once protected your own team. I know what I'm asking. M.T. Aurora had burned the note immediately, had told herself she wouldn't come, had packed her gear anyway. Through the scope, she watched Alara smile at something her father whispered. The young woman had her mother's eyes, bright and determined. Sarah Thompson had died of cancer 3 years ago, never knowing that the mysterious woman who visited her hospital room once, claiming to be an old friend, was actually the sniper her husband had trusted with his life on 7 different operations. Aurora's finger rested alongside the trigger guard, never on the trigger itself. Not yet, maybe not ever. She was here as insurance, as the ghost in the machine, the backup plan that wouldn't be needed because every threat assessment showed this wedding was secure. But the general hadn't asked her here because he believed his own security teams. He'd asked because he knew something they didn't, and because he knew that if something went wrong, Aurora Hale was the only person in the world who could make it right. The priest raised his hands to begin the vows. Alara turned to face Daniel, her smile radiant in the candlelight. The guests rose as one. Aurora swept the scope across the perimeter one more time, a habit ingrained from 2,000 hours of Overwatch missions. Everything looked clear. Maybe the general's instincts had been wrong. Maybe she had made this journey for nothing. Then she saw it. A glint of metal in the tree line, 200 meters from the cathedral's east entrance. Then another, then 3 more. Her heart rate, trained to stay below 50 beats per minute in combat, kicked up to 60. She switched to thermal imaging. 12 heat signatures, moving in tactical formation, approaching from 3 directions. Professional spacing, military discipline. They wore thermal dispersing suits, which meant they knew they might be watched. Aurora's thumb flipped the safety selector to fire. Her breathing slowed to 4-second cycles. Inside the cathedral, the priest asked if anyone objected to the union. Outside, in the snow, 12 armed figures emerged from the darkness, and on the bell tower, a ghost prepared to remind the world why they called her White Raven. The east doors exploded inward at exactly 8:47 p.m., not with explosives, too crude, too loud, too much risk of casualties that might include the primary target. Instead, the assault team used a hydraulic ram followed by a flash crash device that filled the cathedral with blinding light and disorienting sound. The guests screamed, dropped to the floor, covered their heads. Years of active shooter drills kicked in, but nothing could prepare civilians for a military-grade tactical assault. Aurora tracked the first shooter through her scope. Male, 6'2", moving with the fluid efficiency of special operations training. His weapon was a customized rifle with a suppressor, carried at low ready. Behind him, 2 more operators swept the room with synchronized precision. She counted the team members as they entered, 12 total, just as her thermal scan had shown. 4 through the east entrance, 4 through the west, 4 held the north exit. They wore black tactical gear with no insignia, no identifying markers. Their faces were covered with balaclavas and night vision goggles pushed up on their heads. They wanted the congregation to see them, to fear them. The cathedral's security team reacted within 3 seconds. 6 military police officers, all armed, all trained. One managed to draw his sidearm before a suppressed 3-round burst dropped him. Not killed, Aurora could see him writhing on the floor, shot in the leg and shoulder. Professional work. They wanted hostages alive, guards disabled. Through her scope, Aurora tracked the assault leader. He moved differently from the others, with the absolute confidence of someone who had run operations in far more dangerous places than a Montana cathedral. He strode directly toward the altar where Alara stood frozen, her white dress stark against the chaos. Daniel tried to step in front of his bride. The assault leader swept him aside with a rifle butt to the stomach. The captain went down hard, gasping. General Thompson moved next, reaching for a concealed weapon that protocol said he should have but security regulations said he couldn't have at his own daughter's wedding. The assault leader shot him. Aurora's finger moved to the trigger. Her crosshairs centered on the shooter's head. The wind was negligible at this range, maybe .2 mil value, an easy shot, one she had made 1,000 times. But Alara was 2 feet from the target, and 12 other shooters controlled the room. The assault leader pressed his weapon against Alara's temple. "General Marcus Thompson," he announced, his voice carrying over the sobbing guests. "You've been shot in the shoulder, painful but not fatal. You have approximately 4 minutes before you lose consciousness from blood loss. I suggest you spend that time wisely." The general pressed his hand against his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp. "Who are you?" "We're ghosts from Phoenix Division, the unit you betrayed, the soldiers you abandoned." The leader grabbed Alara's arm, pulled her away from the altar. "We want the access codes to Phoenix Vault. You have 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Aurora processed the information through her tactical computer, the custom device built into her rifle stock that tracked wind, range, movement, and probability. Phoenix Division had been a black operations unit, officially dissolved 8 years ago after evidence of war crimes in Eastern Europe. Marcus Thompson had been the one to present that evidence, destroying the careers of 40 operators and sending their commander to military prison. She should have anticipated revenge, should have known that shutting down Phoenix wouldn't end with a trial. The assault team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 shooters deployed signal jammers, cutting off all cell and radio communication. Another pair fired smoke canisters toward the security team's positions, cold-burning compounds that created thick, white clouds. Within 30 seconds, the cathedral interior became a maze of obscured sight lines. Aurora lost visual on Alara. Her pulse jumped to 70. She forced it back down through controlled breathing. Panic was poison for a sniper. She switched to thermal imaging again, watching the heat signatures move. The assault team was extracting, taking Alara toward the north exit where their getaway vehicles would be waiting. She had perhaps 20 seconds before they disappeared into the forest. Through thermal, she tracked the assault leader. He was pulling Alara, her white-hot signature, struggling against his grip. The other operators formed a protective diamond around them, weapons scanning for threats. They had trained for counter-sniper tactics. They knew someone might be watching. But they didn't know Aurora Hale was the one watching. She adjusted her aim, leading the target by 3 feet to account for their movement speed. The door was 80 meters from the tree line, another 90 meters to where their vehicles would be staged. If they reached the forest, they'd have cover. If they reached the vehicles, they'd be gone. She had one chance. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The crosshairs settled on a spotlight mounted above the north exit. She exhaled halfway and squeezed. The suppressed shot made barely a whisper. 800 meters away, the spotlight exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. The assault team flinched, scattered their formation for just a moment. It wasn't enough for a killing shot, but it was enough to send a message. Someone was watching. Someone was hunting. The assault leader looked up, scanning the rooflines and towers. Aurora remained perfectly still, trusting her camouflage. After 5 seconds, he barked an order she couldn't hear, and the team regrouped, moving faster now, dragging Alara into the night. Aurora tracked them through thermal as they entered the forest. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, not from fear, from memory. From the last time she'd been in a situation like this, when speed mattered more than precision, when her team had needed her and she hadn't been fast enough, when Marcus Chen, the man who taught her to shoot, the man who kissed her before every mission, had died because her shot came 2 seconds too late. She closed her eyes, forced the memory down, opened them again. Below, in the cathedral, the remaining security teams were regrouping. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but they would arrive too late. The assault team had planned for response times, for backup, for everything except the possibility that a dead woman might be watching from a bell tower. Aurora broke down her rifle into 3 pieces with practiced efficiency. She had tracked them this far. Now she would hunt them. The general had asked her to protect his daughter like she'd once protected her team. This time, she wouldn't be 2 seconds late. 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days ago, Aurora Hale had been the most decorated sniper in American military history. Not that anyone could verify that her service record was classified at levels most generals would never see. But the operators who worked in the shadows knew. They whispered the stories during downtime, during training rotations, during the long nights waiting for targets who might never appear. 297 confirmed eliminations. Longest confirmed kill, 2,400 meters. Number of operations where her overwatch prevented American casualties, 38. Number of times she missed a shot, 0. They called her White Raven because she appeared only in winter operations, moving through snow and ice like a ghost bird, leaving nothing behind but dead enemies and saved lives. She had been 29 when Marcus Chen died. The mission had been classified beyond the usual black operations category. Someone in the Department of Defense had created a new designation just for their unit, Echo Phantom. 12 operators, the best from every Special Forces branch, tasked with impossible missions in impossible places. They'd been sent to a compound in the Ural Mountains where a terrorist cell was developing a biological weapon. The intelligence had been solid. The plan had been perfect. Aurora had established overwatch on a ridge 2,000 meters from the target, providing cover while her team infiltrated. But intelligence is never perfect. Plans never survive contact with the enemy. The compound had twice as many guards as reported. Reinforced concrete instead of wood. Underground tunnels that weren't on any blueprint. Her team had walked into a trap. Aurora had done everything right. She'd eliminated 17 targets in the first 3 minutes, buying her team time to retreat. She'd called in air support, provided covering fire, directed the extraction helicopter to the backup landing zone. But when Marcus Chen had been shot in the femoral artery while dragging a wounded teammate to cover, there was nothing her rifle could do. The medevac had been 7 minutes away. He'd bled out in 4. She'd held him while he died, whispering that she loved him, that he'd saved them all, that he was the best operator she'd ever known. His last words had been professional to the end. White Raven, still undefeated, still perfect. She'd finished the mission, had provided cover while the rest of her team extracted, had confirmed 17 kills and 0 friendly losses except for the one that mattered most. Then, she'd gone back to base, filed her after-action report, and requested immediate discharge. The military had refused. Operators of her caliber didn't just retire. They had protocols, procedures, debriefings that could take months. So, Aurora Hale had done what she did best. She disappeared. Marcus Thompson, who had commanded the unit that Echo Phantom reported to, had helped her. He'd understood that some wounds couldn't heal in a military structure. He'd arranged the training accident, the closed casket, the sealed file. He'd given her the one thing she needed, permission to stop being White Raven. She'd gone north, into Alaska's wilderness, had built a cabin 70 miles from the nearest town, had learned to live with silence, with solitude, with the knowledge that she would never again hold a rifle scope to her eye. For 5 years, she'd kept that promise to herself. Then Marcus Thompson's message had arrived, and Aurora had discovered that some promises could be broken for the right reasons. Now, moving through the Montana forest like water through ice, she followed the trail that 12 professional soldiers thought they'd hidden. But Aurora had trained some of those professionals. She knew their patterns, their procedures, their mistakes. They'd used a snow rake to hide their tracks near the cathedral. But a snow rake leaves its own signature if you know what to look for: patterns too uniform, compression too even. She followed the disturbances, reading the forest like a language she'd learned before she could speak. 2 kilometers from the cathedral, she found their staging area. Tire tracks in the snow, still fresh. 3 vehicles, heavy, probably armored SUVs. They'd headed west, toward the mountain pass. Aurora knelt beside the tracks, studying the tread patterns. Military grade, but worn. These were veterans who'd been operating for months, maybe years after Phoenix Division's dissolution. They'd become mercenaries, using their training for whoever paid enough. She pulled out her tactical computer, a device she'd built herself from military surplus and civilian components. No GPS that could be tracked, no satellite uplink that could be intercepted. Just a processing unit, a terrain database, and her own calculations. If they were heading west through the pass, they'd need a secure location to hold onHer while they negotiated with the general. Somewhere remote but accessible, somewhere with power and communications. She pulled up the satellite imagery she'd downloaded before leaving Alaska. There, 14 kilometers west, an old lumber facility. It had been abandoned for a decade, but the buildings would be intact, perfect for a temporary base. Aurora checked her gear. Rifle reassembled. 4 magazines, 30 rounds each. Sidearm with 2 magazines. Knife, medical kit, 5 protein bars and 2 liters of water. The snowsuit would keep her alive in the -15-degree night. She started moving. The thing they never told you about revenge operations, about rescue missions, about any tactical situation where emotions got involved. They never told you how much harder it was when you cared about the outcome. During her active service, Aurora had protected hundreds of people she'd never met. It had been pure geometry, angles, distances, wind speeds, probability calculations. No different from a math problem. But onHer Thompson wasn't a math problem. She was the daughter of a man who'd saved Aurora's life in the only way that mattered, by letting her walk away. She was a young woman who should be celebrating the happiest day of her life, not being held hostage by men who wanted revenge. And Aurora had made a promise, not just to Marcus Thompson, but to herself. She'd promised that the next time someone needed her, she wouldn't be 2 seconds too late. The forest was silent except for her breathing and the soft whisper of snow falling from pine branches. Aurora moved like a wraith, covering ground faster than seemed possible for someone carrying 40 pounds of gear. She'd learned this kind of movement in Norway, training with Sami reindeer herders who could cross tundra without leaving tracks. Ahead, through the trees, she saw lights. The old lumber facility. She dropped prone in the snow and pulled out her spotting scope. 12 heat signatures inside the main building. One of them smaller, restrained. Alara. Aurora allowed herself one moment of emotion, pure, cold rage at the men who had turned a wedding into a battlefield. Then she pushed it down, locked it away, and became White Raven again. The lumber facility sprawled across 3 acres of frozen ground. The main building, a 2-story structure that had once housed offices and equipment, stood at the center. Flanking it were 3 warehouse buildings with collapsed roofs and 2 smaller structures that might have been storage sheds. The whole complex was surrounded by a chain-link fence that had rusted into irrelevance. Aurora established a position on a ridge 300 meters north of the facility. From here, she had line of sight on most of the complex. The mercenaries had chosen good sight lines, multiple exit routes, difficult to approach without being seen. Through her scope, she cataloged every detail. 2 sentries outside, rotating positions every 15 minutes. Disciplined, the others remained inside, where heat signatures showed them clustered on the 2nd floor of the main building. They'd set up a command center. She'd seen this pattern before, during joint operations with task forces from other nations. The Phoenix Division had been trained by the same instructors she'd worked with. They thought alike, moved alike, made the same tactical decisions, which meant she knew exactly how to beat them. Aurora opened her tactical computer and began mapping. Every window, every door, every potential firing position. She noted the power lines still connected, which meant they had electricity. The phone lines had been cut years ago, but they'd have satellite communications. Her thermal scope picked up something interesting. Inside the main building, a heat signature much hotter than human body temperature. Generator. They'd brought their own power supply, professional grade. That meant high-bandwidth communications equipment, possibly video feeds. They weren't just holding onHer for ransom. They were staging a performance. Aurora switched to her directional microphone, a parabolic dish barely larger than her palm. She aimed it at the 2nd-floor windows, filtering through the ambient noise until voices emerged. General's got 20 minutes to comply or we start sending pieces. Male voice, deep. The assault leader from the cathedral. Make sure the video feed is clean. I want him to see everything. Satellite uplink is stable. Different voice, younger. But we've got a problem. Local police have roadblocks set up within 30 kilometers. We'll need to move her before dawn. Then we move her. Once we have the codes, we eliminate the witnesses and disappear. Phoenix Vault contains enough classified intelligence to keep us comfortable for life. Aurora's jaw tightened. Phoenix Vault had been the blackest of black operations archives, containing details of every illegal operation Phoenix Division had conducted, war crimes evidence, torture documentation, illegal weapons transactions. Marcus Thompson had sealed it after the unit's dissolution, but he'd kept the access codes rather than destroying the data insurance against the criminals who might come seeking revenge. Now those same criminals wanted to weaponize that information, sell it to enemies, destroy careers and lives. She couldn't let that happen. Through the scope, she tracked the two sentries. They moved in a pattern. Sentry 1 would walk the perimeter, while Sentry 2 held position at the main entrance. Every 15 minutes they'd switch. Professional rotation, designed to prevent fatigue while maintaining constant coverage. But professionals develop habits, and habits create vulnerabilities. Sentry 1, a stocky man with a heavy parka, kept reaching for something in his left pocket, probably a lighter, smoker. He'd pause for 3 seconds every time he completed a circuit, standing in the same spot near the southeast corner where the fence met the tree line. Sentry 2 was more disciplined, but Aurora noticed he favored his right side, probably an old injury. His scans covered right to left, which meant he'd have a half-second delay if a threat emerged from his right side. She could eliminate both sentries within 6 seconds if she needed to, but that would alert the others, turn this into a direct assault. 12 trained operators in a defensive position against one sniper would be suicide, even for her. No, she needed to reduce their numbers quietly, separate them, make them believe they were hunting her when she was actually hurting them exactly where she wanted. Aurora checked her watch. 9:47 p.m. The general had been shot almost an hour ago. He'd be in surgery now, probably at the military hospital in Great Falls. The police would be organizing a response, probably bringing in FBI hostage negotiators and tactical teams. But those resources would take hours to organize, longer to deploy. Elara didn't have hours. Through the scope, Aurora saw movement inside the second-floor windows. Someone pushed Elara into view. She was bound to a chair but appeared unharmed. They positioned a camera, adjusting the angle, preparing to send another message to her father. The assault leader stepped into frame, pulled off his balaclava. Aurora's scope captured his face clearly. Thomas Garrett, former Master Sergeant, Phoenix Division's demolitions expert. She'd read his file during her research after Marcus Thompson's message arrived. 38 years old, 2 combat tours, dishonorably discharged after Phoenix's dissolution. He'd been good once. A soldier who believed in the mission, who protected his teammates. The military had broken him by association, punished him for crimes his commanders had ordered him to commit. Aurora understood that kind of betrayal, understood how it could turn a protector into a predator. But understanding didn't mean mercy. Garrett leaned close to Elara, said something Aurora's microphone couldn't capture. The young woman turned her head away, defiant even in captivity. Marcus Thompson's daughter through and through. Aurora allowed herself a thin smile. Elara wouldn't break easily. That bought time. She needed to move before they did. The mercenaries would relocate before dawn, which gave her maybe 6 hours. 6 hours to reduce 12 operators to a manageable number. 6 hours to plan the impossible rescue. Aurora broke down her observation position, carefully erasing any sign she'd been there. The snow was her ally. It covered tracks, muffled sound, turned the night into a blank canvas where she could paint exactly the chaos she needed. She moved like smoke through the forest, circling the facility. Time to remind Thomas Garrett why they'd called her White Raven. Time to remind him that ghosts were real. And that some hunts only ended one way. At 10:23 p.m., Sentry 1, the smoker, completed his circuit and paused in his habitual spot near the southeast corner. He pulled out his lighter, cupped his hands against the wind, and bent his head to light a cigarette. From 240 meters away, Aurora squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot whispered through the night. The bullet struck the lighter in the man's hand, exploding it in a shower of sparks and fluid. He yelped, dropped the destroyed lighter, and stumbled backward. Not shot, not injured, just terrified. Aurora was already moving, relocating before the sound could give away her position. Through her scope, she watched the sentry frantically radio his team, checking himself for wounds, unable to believe what had just happened. Inside the facility, lights blazed as the Phoenix team mobilized. Sentry 2 sprinted to his partner's position. Within 90 seconds, 4 more operators poured out of the building, weapons ready, night vision goggles in place. Aurora counted them from her new position. 6 now committed outside, scanning the tree line with thermal optics, looking for her heat signature. But she'd wrapped herself in a thermal blanket, becoming invisible to their sensors, and she'd positioned herself behind a boulder that blocked her body heat from their scanning angle. She waited. Patience was a sniper's greatest weapon. After 5 minutes of scanning, Thomas Garrett's voice crackled over their radios. Aurora's directional microphone picked it up clearly. "Report. Did anyone see the shooter?" "Negative. No muzzle flash, no heat signature. But someone just shot Peterson's lighter out of his hand from at least 200 meters. Silence on the radio. Then, White Raven. More silence. Aurora could imagine their faces, men who'd heard the legends, who'd been warned never to face her in combat. Men who thought she was dead. "Impossible," another voice said. "She died 5 years ago." "Then we're being haunted," Garrett replied. "Tactical procedure, phantom protocol. 3-person teams, overlapping fields of fire, thermal and night vision. If she's out there, we find her and we end this." The operators split into 4 3-person teams. 2 teams moved into the forest while 2 remained to guard the facility. Professional tactics. They knew a single sniper, no matter how skilled, couldn't engage multiple targets simultaneously without giving away her position. But they didn't know Aurora had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every night in her Alaska cabin, she'd run simulations. What would she do if she had to operate alone against multiple trained opponents? How would White Raven hunt? The answer: she wouldn't fight like a sniper. She'd fight like a ghost. Aurora moved through the forest with supernatural silence. She'd cached supplies earlier during her approach: climbing gear, spare ammunition, medical equipment. Now she added a new element to the equation. From her pack, she pulled out a small speaker, no larger than her palm, military-grade directional audio device, capable of projecting sound from false positions. She programmed it with a simple audio file, the distinct crack of her rifle shot. She placed the speaker 30 meters south of her actual position, attached to a tree at head height. Programmed it to activate in 10 minutes. Then she moved west, placing 2 more speakers in a triangular pattern, each one programmed to fire in sequence, creating the illusion of her moving through specific coordinates. While the Phoenix teams moved cautiously through the forest, Aurora circled back toward the facility. The remaining 6 operators would be inside with Alara, maintaining defensive positions. They expected the fight to come from the forest. They didn't expect her to move toward them. At 10:41 p.m., the first speaker activated. The recorded gunshot echoed through the trees, perfectly mimicking her rifle's suppressed report. The 2 forest teams immediately converged on the location. They found nothing but a speaker mounted to a tree. "It's a diversion," Garrett's voice came over the radio. "All teams, return to." The second speaker fired. Then the third. Aurora's recorded voice, synthesized from audio samples, whispered through the speakers. 12 targets, 11 remaining. It was psychological warfare, making them question everything, making them see ghosts. But while they were focused on the forest, Aurora was scaling the east side of the main building. She'd spotted a maintenance ladder during her initial reconnaissance, rusted but functional. She climbed in complete silence, her movements fluid and controlled. The second-floor window was locked but not reinforced. She used a glass-cutter circular blade that made no sound to remove a section large enough to reach the latch. 15 seconds later, she was inside. The room was dark, empty. Storage space, filled with old filing cabinets and forgotten equipment. Aurora moved like liquid shadow, checking corners, listening. Through the wall, she heard voices. Garrett's team, arguing about how to respond to her psychological assault. Good. Let them argue. Confusion was the enemy of coordination. She crept to the door, pressed her ear against it. 2 voices in the hallway outside, guards stationed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. Aurora pulled her knife 8 inches of carbon steel, serrated on one edge. She preferred the rifle, the clean distance of long-range elimination, but tonight required a different kind of precision. She slowly turned the door handle, 1/4 inch at a time. The mechanism was old, probably creaky, but she moved with such control that no sound emerged. The door opened 2 inches. Through the gap, she could see one guard, his back to her. The second was visible in reflection on a window 4 meters down the hall, facing her direction but looking at his phone. Amateur mistake. Never split your attention during security duty. Aurora slipped through the door like smoke. 3 steps, perfectly silent. Her left hand covered the first guard's mouth as her right hand struck the knife pommel, not the blade, hitting the nerve cluster behind his ear. He dropped unconscious, no sound except the whisper of his equipment settling. The second guard looked up from his phone. His eyes went wide, his hand reached for his weapon. Aurora threw the knife. It wasn't a throwing knife, it wasn't balanced for it. But at 4 meters, with her training, it didn't matter. The blade buried itself in his forearm, forcing him to drop his weapon. She closed the distance before he could scream, delivered the same pommel strike. 2 down, 10 remaining. She dragged both bodies into the storage room, zip-tied their hands and feet, gagged them with strips of their own clothing. They'd wake up in an hour with headaches but no permanent damage. Aurora reclaimed her knife, wiped it clean, checked her position. She was now inside their perimeter, behind their defenses. The rescue was no longer impossible, just extremely unlikely. Through the wall, she heard Alara's voice. "You're cowards, all of you. My father will never give you those codes." Thomas Garrett's laugh was bitter. "Your father already gave us the codes. He sent them 5 minutes ago. Now we're just deciding what to do with you." Aurora's blood went cold. If they had the codes, they had no reason to keep Alara alive, no reason to stay. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Time to stop hunting like a ghost. Time to fight like White Raven. The door to Alara's holding room wasn't locked. Why would it be? They had 8 armed operators inside, a hostage bound to a chair, and a perimeter they believed was secure. Aurora stood in the hallway, calculating angles. 8 against 1 in close quarters was suicide, but she'd done impossible things before. She pulled 3 objects from her vest, a flashbang, a smoke grenade, and what looked like a small metal disc. The disc was her own creation, an electromagnetic pulse device that would fry any electronics within 20 meters. It would also destroy her own equipment, but she wouldn't need technology for what came next. This would be brutal, personal, the kind of combat she'd avoided for 5 years because it brought back too many memories of holding Marcus Chen while he died. But Alara Thompson didn't have time for Aurora's trauma. She twisted the flashbang's primer, kicked the door open, and threw. The explosion was blinding, deafening. Before the sound finished echoing, she activated the EMP device and tossed it inside. Every light went dark, every radio died, every night vision goggle became useless weight. Aurora had closed her eyes before the flashbang detonated. Now, she opened them in the darkness, seeing shapes where others saw nothing. 5 years of living in Alaska's winter darkness had trained her eyes to function with almost no light. She moved through the door like a wolf into a sheep pen. The first operator was stumbling, hands over his ears from the flashbang. Aurora swept his legs, drove her knee into his solar plexus, struck the nerve cluster under his jaw. Down. The second managed to raise his weapon. She grabbed the barrel, redirected it as he fired. The suppressed shot went wild. She stripped the weapon, reversed it, used it like a club. Down. Third and fourth came together, better trained. They'd fought in darkness before. One tried to grab her while the other aimed where his partner held her. Aurora dropped under the grab, drove her palm into the third man's knee. The joint gave with a wet pop. His scream covered the sound of her rolling, coming up behind the fourth, delivering a knife strike to his thigh that dropped him but wouldn't kill. 4 down, 4 remaining, plus Thomas Garrett. "She's here!" someone shouted. "In the room!" Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Bullets tore through air where Aurora had been half a second before. She was already moving, using the sound of their breathing, the smell of their fear, the small movements that betrayed position. The fifth operator tried to back toward the door. Aurora intercepted him, struck his throat not hard enough to crush his windpipe, just hard enough to paralyze his breathing for 10 seconds. He collapsed, gasping. A bullet grazed her shoulder. Pain, hot and sharp. She rolled behind an overturned desk. The 6th and 7th operators were coordinating, one suppressing while the other moved to flank. Professional tactics. They'd recovered from the shock. Aurora grabbed one of the fallen operator's weapons. Checked the magazine by touch, 12 rounds. She fired 3 shots at the ceiling, creating enough distraction to sprint across the room. The flanking operator never saw her coming. She hit him from the side, driving him into the wall. His weapon discharged, hitting his own partner. Not fatal, but the 7th man went down screaming. 3 seconds later, the 6th operator was unconscious from a chokehold. 8 down. The room was silent except for groaning and labored breathing. Aurora stood, weapon ready, scanning for the last target. Thomas Garrett. "Impressive," his voice came from the shadows. "They said you were the best. Guess the rumors were true." Aurora said nothing, conserving breath, listening, trying to pinpoint his position. You know I was there, Garrett continued. Operation Arctic Storm. I was part of the extraction team that pulled your unit out after Marcus Chen died. I saw what it did to you. Saw you break. He was moving while he talked, trying to flank her. Aurora tracked him by sound, by the way air moved in the room. We weren't bad people, Garrett said. Phoenix Division. We did what we were ordered. We bled for this country. And Thompson destroyed us for following commands. You tortured civilians, Aurora replied, giving away her position but also confirming his. You murdered prisoners. You sold intelligence to enemy states. That wasn't orders. That was choice. Garrett laughed. We made hard choices. Just like you're making now. You could have walked away, could have stayed dead, but you came back. That makes you like us. No, Aurora said quietly. I came back to save someone. You came back for revenge. We're nothing alike. She moved as she spoke, sliding along the wall. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, but the wound was superficial. She'd had worse. Ilara, she called out. I'm going to cut your restraints. Stay low. She found the chair by touch, felt Ilara's rapid breathing. The young woman was terrified but alive. Aurora sliced through the zip ties with her knife. When I say run, Aurora whispered, you go through that door and you don't stop. But, go. A gunshot. Wood splinters exploded from the chair where Ilara had been sitting half a second before. Aurora had already pushed her toward the door. Run. Ilara ran. Aurora turned toward Garrett's muzzle flash, fired 3 rounds from her captured weapon. Heard him grunt, stumble. She'd hit him, but not fatally. More running steps. Garrett was escaping through a back entrance Aurora hadn't known existed. She sprinted after him, bursting into a stairwell. Below, she heard the door slam. Saw emergency lights flickering, battery-powered, not affected by her EMP. Aurora took the stairs 3 at a time, her wounded shoulder screaming. She hit the ground floor, weapon up, scanning. Empty. Outside, an engine roared to life. Through the window, she saw an SUV accelerating away from the facility. Thomas Garrett was escaping, and he had the Phoenix Vault codes. Aurora ran for the exit, but she knew she was too late. By the time she reached the door, the SUV was already 500 meters down the access road, throwing up a rooster tail of snow. She raised her weapon, knowing the shot was impossible. An SUV at 500 meters, moving at speed. In darkness with a handgun, she might as well try to shoot the moon. But then she saw Ilara stumbling through the snow toward the fence line, and made a choice. The young woman was safe. That was the mission. Garrett could wait. Aurora ran to Ilara, caught her as she stumbled. It's okay. You're safe now. Ilara stared at her, eyes wide with shock and adrenaline. Who? Who are you? A friend of your father's. We need to move. The others will wake up soon, and police are coming. You're her, Ilara breathed. You're White Raven. Dad told me about you. He said you were a myth. Myths don't bleed, Aurora said, pressing a hand against her shoulder. Come on, we have to go. They disappeared into the forest together, leaving behind 8 unconscious operators in a facility that would soon be swarming with federal agents. But Thomas Garrett was still out there, with codes that could bring down governments, and Aurora knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Aurora and Ilara reached the road. The young woman was exhausted, traumatized, but alive. Aurora had called for extraction using a satellite phone she'd cached in the forest. Marcus Thompson's people would arrive within the hour, but Aurora wouldn't be there when they did. You're going after him, Ilara said. It wasn't a question. Aurora checked her rifle, loading a fresh magazine. He has information that will get people killed. I can't let him disappear. You're hurt, Ilara gestured to Aurora's shoulder, where blood had soaked through her jacket. I've had worse. Dad said you were the best sniper alive. He also said you swore you'd never fight again. Aurora paused, meeting the young woman's eyes. Your father saved my life by letting me walk away from war. The least I can do is make sure you get back to him safely. I am safe. You did that already. Ilara stepped closer. Now you're choosing to go back. Why? It was a good question. Aurora had asked herself the same thing during the long night of hunting. She could have grabbed Ilara and run, could have let the FBI handle Thomas Garrett, but she knew they wouldn't catch him. Garrett was too well trained, too experienced. He'd disappear into the global shadow economy of military contractors and mercenaries. He'd sell the Phoenix Vault intelligence to the highest bidder, and people would die. Operators whose identities were in those files. Sources who'd trusted American intelligence. Entire operations that would be compromised. Because I'm the only one who can stop him, Aurora said simply. She'd tracked his SUV from the lumber facility. He was heading west, toward the mountains. There was an airfield in Whitefish, 40 miles away. Private charters, no questions asked. If he reached it, he'd be gone. But the route there passed through Thompson Pass, a narrow canyon with limited sightlines. Sniper's paradise. Aurora had exactly one chance. She left Alara with her satellite phone and clear instructions. Stay hidden until extraction arrived. Don't tell anyone where Aurora went. The official story would be that a mysterious woman helped with the rescue but disappeared. White Raven would remain a myth. Then Aurora started running. 23 miles to Thompson Pass. She had maybe 2 hours before Garrett reached it. 23 miles through snow, carrying 40 pounds of gear, with a wounded shoulder. She ran anyway. The first 5 miles were through forest, following game trails she'd memorized from topographic maps. Her breathing found a rhythm, 4 steps in, 4 steps out, meditation through motion. The pain in her shoulder became distant, irrelevant. At mile 7, she crossed a frozen stream, the ice groaning under her weight. At mile 12, she climbed a ridge that left her gasping, legs burning. At mile 18, she stumbled, fell, forced herself up. Keep moving. No time. At mile 20, she could see Thompson Pass ahead, a slash through the mountains, where the road wound between 2 peaks. Perfect ambush position. She had 3 miles to reach the overlook where she'd planned her shot. 3 miles. 30 minutes if she maintained pace. Her legs felt like concrete. Her lungs burned. Blood loss from her shoulder was making her lightheaded, but she pushed harder, drawing on reserves she'd thought were empty. 25 years of training. 2,000 hours of combat. 297 lives taken to save thousands more. All of it came down to this. 1 mile left, 1 shot to make, 1 target who couldn't be allowed to escape. She reached the overlook with 7 minutes to spare. Her hands were shaking as she set up her rifle. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from blood loss. From the simple fact that her body had been pushed beyond any reasonable limit. Aurora steadied herself against a boulder, forced her breathing to slow, pulled out her scope and scanned the road below. Empty. Still had time. She did the calculations. Distance to the road, 1,100 meters. Elevation difference, 240 meters. Wind, variable, gusting from the northwest at 12 to 15 miles per hour. Temperature, -8 degrees Celsius. The shot was beyond extreme. At this range, she'd need to account for the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself affecting the bullet's path. She'd need to predict not just where Garrett's vehicle would be, but where it would be 3 seconds after she fired. Her computer was dead, fried by her own EMP device. She'd have to do all calculations manually, using a ballistic chart she'd memorized years ago. Through the scope, she saw movement. Black SUV, accelerating through the pass. Thomas Garrett, running for freedom. Aurora chambered around. Checked the wind flags, small pieces of cloth she'd placed on trees below to indicate wind direction. Calculated the lead distance. Made her adjustments. This was an impossible shot, but she'd made impossible shots before. Her finger settled on the trigger. She thought of Marcus Chen, teaching her to shoot when she was 22 years old, teaching her that confidence was just preparation, plus commitment. She thought of every operator who'd trusted her Overwatch, every soldier who'd gone home because she'd been watching from the shadows. She thought of Alara Thompson, safe now because Aurora had chosen to come back. And she thought of Thomas Garrett, who'd betrayed everything a soldier should be, who chose revenge over honor, who would destroy lives to satisfy his own bitter anger. The SUV entered her firing window. She had 4 seconds before it passed into the canyon's dead zone, where trees would block any shot. 4 seconds to change the world. Aurora exhaled halfway. The crosshairs settled on a point 12 feet in front of the moving vehicle, adjusted for the bullet's 3-second flight time. Still perfect, she whispered. Marcus Chen's last words to her. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The suppressed shot whispered across the canyon. Time seemed to stop as Aurora watched through the scope. The bullet flew true. 1,100 meters through variable wind, dropping, curving, affected by gravity and atmosphere, and the spin of the planet itself. It struck the SUV's front left tire, exactly as Aurora had intended. Not the driver she wouldn't kill if she could disable. The tire exploded. The vehicle swerved, left the road, crashed into a snowbank. Non-fatal, but effective. Aurora was already moving, sliding down the ridge toward the crash site. Her radio, a backup unit she'd cached, crackled to life as she ran. White Raven, this is Thompson Actual. Come in. Marcus Thompson's voice. Weak, but alive. Thompson Actual. This is White Raven. Package is secure. Target is contained. Sending coordinates for extraction. A pause. Then, you came back. Yes, sir. Just this once. Thank you, for everything. Aurora reached the crashed SUV. Thomas Garrett was climbing out, dazed but uninjured. He looked up at her, at the rifle in her hands. How? He breathed. That shot. Was impossible, Aurora agreed. She pulled zip ties from her pack. But I stopped believing in impossible about 23 miles ago. She secured him, called in his position to FBI channels. By the time federal agents arrived 15 minutes later, Aurora had vanished into the forest. White Raven had returned to the shadows where she belonged. The military hospital in Great Falls was quiet on Christmas morning. Marcus Thompson sat in his bed, left arm in a sling, watching snow fall outside his window. His daughter sat beside him, holding his good hand. She saved my life, Illyra said quietly. She took on 12 armed men by herself. That's what White Raven does, Marcus replied. That's who she is. Dad, she's gone. The FBI found 8 unconscious men and 1 under arrest, but no sign of the woman who stopped them. She just disappeared. Marcus smiled. That's also what White Raven does. A nurse entered with his breakfast tray. Underneath the food, barely visible, was a small envelope. After the nurse left, Marcus opened it. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten, "Debt repaid. Stay safe, General. A.H." He burned the note in the bedside candle, watching the paper turn to ash. Some things remained classified, even from family. Outside, in the parking lot, Aurora Hale packed her gear into a truck she'd borrowed. The bullet wound on her shoulder had been treated at a veterinary clinic. The vet hadn't asked questions about the woman who paid in cash for animal bite care. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. Alaska was calling her home, back to silence, back to solitude, back to the promise she'd made to herself 5 years ago. But this time, she didn't feel broken. This time, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus Chen died. She felt whole. Before pulling away, she glanced at the hospital window. Couldn't see into the room, but she imagined Marcus Thompson looking out, knowing she was there. One last tribute to the man who'd given her freedom. Then she drove away, disappearing into the falling snow like a ghost, like a myth.